This is a presentation of the master thesis by Richard Abbott and Espen de Lange as part of a Master of Science program at the Lund University in Sweden. The global aviation network is perhaps one of the most complex socio-technical systems in the world. Around the clock every day there are over 100,000 flights carrying 10 million passengers. Yet there are as few as 2.8 accidents for every million flights. We can determine that the industry is ultra safe. It hasn't always been that safe, of course. One important factor to this level of safety has been the creation of rules. The very first aviation rules were established when air mail services were commercialized back in 1926. The Air Commerce Act contained 45 pages. The complete rulebook for modern aviation is about 100 times thicker. These rules have developed mainly based on findings from accidents and incidents. We have learned from them. From the very beginning, most accidents were attributed to human error. As technology improved and aviation grew more complex, there has been a paradigm shift from focus on individual error and technical skills to focus on broader system perspective. The accident statistics have not changed in this regard, though. 75 to 80% of accidents today are attributed to human error as before. New rules and procedures are meant to mitigate human error, help pilots handle challenges, and make better decisions. There is little doubt that the rules have actually helped for a long time. What we set out to explore is how does this development of constantly introducing new rules help in today's complex world? To make the question a bit more specific, we wanted to explore how rules help in difficult situations. We interviewed 16 pilots from 4 different companies. Since this question is hard to answer, we divided it into 3 sub-questions that we felt would make it a relaxed and exploratory conversation. Question 1 sets the scope. Question 2 is more to the point. And question 3 puts things in perspective. Our interviewees gave us a lot of rich data. In short, we can confidently claim that pilots have high regards of their procedures and see them as a great support. They create a frame with structure and predictability. We got a clear sense, though, that the rules do not help equally in all situations. Sometimes they even make things more difficult. In some situations, using rules to guide the pilots can even create problems, as the dynamics of the situation seem to require something else than focusing on rules. We'll show you broadly how we analyzed our data and what we concluded. We funneled our data into a highly analytical brain, and his rather incomprehensible mind map looked something like this. One way of making sense of it is to group the data in themes as follows. 3 pilots had experiences where there are no rules for rapidly changing situations. These are stories about instrument approaches that rapidly develop into something out of the ordinary, without anybody breaking any rules. The rules, they say, are made for predictable situations where the factors are known. Dynamic, unpredictable situations are different from the regulations. 7 stories were about how rules help shape professional identity. Pilots talked about how the rules need to be taught so they make sense. Some rules, they say, may seem inexpedient or counterproductive. Proper use of rules requires understanding the intent in order to handle situations where the rules do not match the context exactly. This would contribute to respect for the rules and thus help prevent practical drift. 7 narratives explain that even when rules exist, they may not apply to the situation. Pilots are aware that there is a gap between what the world looks like from the rulemaker's perspective, or workers imagined, and how the world is in reality out there in the field when work is actually done. The pilots said you need to be aware of this gap in order to figure out how to apply rules proficiently. Sometimes this means being more conservative than the rules require. They also talked about how rules sometimes need to be regarded as a guidance, where the pilot has to figure out how to ensure safe outcome. 6 pilot stories finally talked about purpose. This is about whose interest the rules serve. There are many stakeholders who make rules. Manufacturers, politicians, management, economists, insurance agencies, regulators, to name a few. Even though their intent may be to create safety, their rules may not always serve the pilot's interests. These rules may even exert various pressures. Our pilots talked about how they rarely are participants in the rule-making process. This contributes to the gap between work as imagined and work as done. So finally, what should we make of all this? All the pilots had similar stories about how they used the rules not only in routine situations, but also when things got difficult. All pilots rely heavily on rules and respect them. But for some situations there are no rules. In some cases there are rules, but they don't match the situation. This requires the pilots to adapt. Our pilots confirmed what our literature presents. Some rules in this complex socio-technical system do not help the pilots make decisions. Pilots operating at the sharp end must make decisions that sometimes mean the difference between success and disaster. These decisions must sometimes be made despite a gap between work as imagined on one side and work as actually done on the other. As we set out on this research journey, we were aware of this gap and wanted to find out how to close it. After all the review of the rich stories of experienced colleagues in aviation, we have changed our objective. This gap will always exist. The rule makers, no matter how thorough, can not know what is the correct action for all situations. Therefore, it makes more sense not only to reduce the gap, but also monitor and explore it. Rules need to be evaluated. Good rules need to be enforced. Bad rules need to be redesigned or scrapped. But sometimes pilots just need the freedom and authority to use their experience and skills. This is an opportunity to increase resilience. Now, this was a very condensed, now 8.5-minute version of our thesis. It does not pay proper tribute to all the wonderful literature we have used. For a complete version, please do not hesitate to contact the authors. We would love it if you could send us your critical comments on our attempt to explore how rules and procedures help pilots make decisions in difficult situations. And thank you for your time.